welcome to my discussion. So, who here plays video games or has played video games while growing up?
Me?
I did.
Okay. Have any of them been violent games?
Yeah, a
Yeah,
lot of
yes.
So, have you ever thought to yourself, hey, let me get about the house, go to the store, buy a gun, and go shoot up people I'm at school or at work?
No.
No.
Doesn't that kind of sound silly?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
All right. As we're all aware, there's been a lot of mass shootings at schools in the United States over the last few years. The most recent one happening in Florida at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Yeah, I could never say that name right. Anyway, it's gotten to the point where there are actual active shooter drills at some high schools or some middle schools now. And I believe as U.S. citizens, that's cause for concern for all of us, not just for ourselves, but for the future generation as well. So it's important to look into, what factors contribute to these acts of violence happening, and so how we could better prevent them in the future. So after Stoneman Douglas happened, President Trump called for a summit between members of the video game industry and the White House in order to discuss the possible new policies on video games regarding restrictions, ratings, and all that. This is due to the fact that the shooter from Florida, his name is Nicholas Cruz, and he was said to have played sometimes up to 15 hours of video games a day, and that's a lot. So, and it's also not the first time a school shooter has been connected to video games. I believe the shooter from Virginia Tech, Cho Sung Hui, he was about 21 years old. He was said to have played the game Counter-Strike a lot. And the two shooters from Columbine High School in Colorado, they were addicted to the game Doom. So after they commit their acts of violence, obviously it makes sense for the police officers to look at all possible factors, and video games is one of the things they were said to have played a lot. So you gotta explore all possible options. I agree with that. However, to say that video games is the primary cause for them to act out, to express their aggressive behavior in the form of shooting people at schools, I believe that's very far-fetched, and there's some level of ad absurdum fallacy in this logic. Many other teens in the whole country play these games, yet only a small fraction commit these actual acts of violence. So personally, I played games all my life, and I never thought, it never occurred to me to go out and shoot anybody. There's also, and I've lived in other countries. The teens in other countries have access to the same games we do. In fact, sometimes it's easier to buy these games in other countries because parents don't pay as much attention to the age restrictions and the laws and everything like that. So young kids can just go to the store and just purchase the games. Whereas here at stores like GameStop, person behind the desk is going to look at your age and what it looks out if you look too young to come and buy the game. And also in other countries, if you notice, there's not nearly ever the same amount of incidents that occur here. So just, person go into school and shoot 30 people. Students have shown studies, there's been a lot of studies, and the studies have shown mixed results. Some say there is a correlation between violent games and teenage aggression, and some said there's no correlation. But if you take a look at the profile of all three shooters, besides the fact that they played video games, and the three shooters I'm talking about is the aforementioned Virginia Tech, Columbine, and the Florida shooter. What else do they all have in common besides the fact that they play video games? They're all young boys or young men, either in their late teens or in their early 20s. And as far as, you can surmise that their already aggressive nature may attracted them to play such video games rather than vice versa. So, in summary, I'd just like to say that although there's a correlation between video games or violent video games and teenage aggression or some of the, let's say, the shooters who've just committed these acts, you can't assume that one causes the other just because of the correlation. I believe that the real culprit is our access to guns in the United States, especially when you look at it from a global perspective. That is all. Are there any questions?
Oh, yes, I do have.
Yes.
Why do you think that the NRA and some politicians keep blaming video game for being the main factor behind mass shooting?
I believe that the NRA has an agenda because obviously they're in the business of selling weapons, firearms. So it makes sense that they look for a smoke screen or a distraction. So they look at the fact that these school shooters, like a lot of these shooters from these schools are actually either ex-students from the schools or current students from these schools. So they fall into the age group that plays video games. So the NRA, after they commit their acts, police research and everything, come to find out they play video games, the NRA tries to lash onto that as a form of distraction. That's what I believe. Any more questions?
Yeah, I got one. How much do you think mental illness plays a part into all of these like school shooters? You think?
I believe there's some element of mental illness. It's said that some of these shooters, they were actually not the three I mentioned, but in the past some were either bullied or had past problems with family members and all that. The guy from Florida, it was said that he actually, some people tried to report him to the police, but it was never taken seriously. So he already had psychological problems to begin with. But the United States is not unique to mental illness. There's mentally ill people all over the world. Yet, as I mentioned before, no such violence. So I believe that the uncommon denominator is the fact that we have easy access to guns, more so than mental illness, and especially more so than video games. Okay, and here's my audience. Would y'all like to clap?